world didn't almost end with a bang. It almost ended with a signal. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, inside a Soviet command bunker, warning systems lit up with a message no one ever wanted to see. Launch detected. A nuclear attack from the United States. Protocols were clear. There was no room for hesitation. If confirmed, retaliation would begin within minutes. Hundreds of missiles, millions of lives. A war no one could stop once it started. But that night, something didn't feel right. And one man made a decision that wasn't in the manual. For decades, the Cold War was not just a political conflict. It was a system built around fear, speed, and the assumption that the other side might strike first. By the early 1980s, the United States and the Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy each other many times over. The danger was not only that someone might choose to start a war, the danger was that the machines designed to prevent surprise could create the surprise themselves. Both superpowers lived inside a terrifying logic. If the enemy launched nuclear missiles, you had only minutes to detect them, verify the attack, warn the leadership, and prepare retaliation. There was no time for careful investigation, no time to call scientists, no time to wait for certainty. The entire system depended on fast decisions made under extreme pressure, and in 1983 that pressure was almost unbearable. Relations between Washington and Moscow were collapsing. Earlier that month, on September 1st, 1983, the Soviet Union had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it entered Soviet airspace. All 269 people on board were killed, including an American congressman. The West was furious. President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Moscow believed the United States was becoming more aggressive, more unpredictable, and possibly willing to test Soviet defenses. At the same time, NATO was preparing military exercises in Europe. American Pershing II missiles were being deployed, weapons that could reach Soviet targets in minutes. Soviet leaders feared a surprise attack disguised as a drill. Inside the Kremlin, paranoia was no longer just propaganda. It shaped real military planning. This was the world Stanislav Petrov walked into on the night of September 26, 1983. Petrov was not a general. He was not a political leader. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces, assigned to a secret command center known as Serpukhov 15, south of Moscow. His job was to monitor Oko, the Soviet early warning satellite system. If the system detected an American missile launch, Petrov's duty was to report it up the chain of command. That sounds simple. But in nuclear war, a report is not just a report. It can become the first step toward retaliation. The bunker was designed for one purpose: to detect the beginning of World War III before Soviet cities were hit. Operators watched screens, processed incoming data, and waited for a signal they hoped would never come. Most nights were routine, silent screens, technical checks, procedures. But the entire place existed because one night might be different, and then it happened. Just after midnight, the system reported that a missile had been launched from the United States. Then another, then more. The computer indicated that 5 American intercontinental ballistic missiles were on their way toward the Soviet Union. Inside the command center, alarms sounded. Red warning lights flashed. The system did not describe this as a minor technical issue. It classified the threat with the highest level of confidence. For the operators in that room, this was the nightmare scenario. The machine was telling them that America had fired first. Petrov now had to make a decision that no human being should ever have to make. Follow protocol and report a confirmed American nuclear attack, or wait, question the system, and risk being wrong. If he reported the warning as real, Soviet leadership could assume the country was under attack. In the logic of the Cold War, waiting too long meant losing the ability to respond. Missiles in silos could be destroyed before they launched. Command centers could be wiped out. Leaders could be killed. So the pressure was always towards speed. But Petrov saw something strange. The system claimed the United States had launched only a handful of missiles. 5. Not hundreds. Not a massive strike designed to disable Soviet nuclear forces. Just 5. To Petrov, that made no military sense. If the United States were really starting a nuclear war, it would not begin with a tiny attack. It would launch a large strike meant to overwhelm Soviet defenses and destroy as much of the Soviet arsenal as possible. A small launch would give the Soviets time to retaliate. That detail may have saved the world. Petrov did not trust the machine completely. He understood that the satellite system was new, complex, and not beyond error. He also knew that ground-based radar had not yet confirmed incoming missiles. The satellites had seen something, but radar confirmation would only come later, once the missiles were closer. So he waited. Minutes passed. In a nuclear crisis, minutes are not empty time. They are the entire battlefield. Every second increases the pressure to act. Every delay can look like weakness. Every hesitation can be interpreted as failure. But Petrov held his position. He judged the warning to be a false alarm. He did not report it as a confirmed attack. And then the truth slowly became clear. No missiles were coming. No American strike had begun. The Soviet satellite system had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for missile launches. A technical error had created the illusion of nuclear war. The world had not been saved by a perfect system. It had been saved because one officer refused to treat the system as perfect. What happened next is just as important as the moment itself. In the immediate aftermath, there was no celebration, no announcement, no acknowledgement that the world had come dangerously close to nuclear war. Instead, the incident was classified, buried, treated as a technical failure, not a historic turning point. Inside the Soviet system, admitting that the early warning network could generate a false alarm at that level was deeply uncomfortable. The entire nuclear doctrine depended on trust in detection systems. If those systems could be wrong, then every decision built on them became uncertain, and uncertainty in a nuclear standoff was dangerous. Petrov was questioned, not praised. Investigations focused on procedure. Why hadn't he filled out the logs exactly as required? Why had he deviated from strict reporting protocol? From a bureaucratic perspective, he had taken a risk. He had relied on judgment instead of procedure. And in highly centralized systems, that is often seen as a problem, not a strength. He was never officially punished in a dramatic way, but he was also never rewarded. No medals, no public recognition. His career stalled. Eventually, he left the military. For years, almost no one outside a small circle knew what had happened that night. It wasn't until the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that details of the incident became public. Former officials began speaking about near-miss events during the Cold War, and Petrov's story emerged as one of the most serious. By then, the narrative of nuclear deterrence had already been built on a dangerous assumption: that systems, protocols, and rational actors would prevent catastrophe. But Petrov's decision exposed a flaw in that assumption. The system didn't work. It produced a false signal that, under slightly different circumstances, could have triggered a real response. The protocols didn't guarantee safety. They demanded speed over certainty. And the human element, often seen as a weak link, turned out to be the only safeguard that mattered. This raises a deeper question. How many other moments like this have happened? We know of several. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine commander, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to authorize the launch of a nuclear torpedo, even as his crew believed war might have already started. That decision likely prevented an immediate escalation between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1995, long after the Cold War had officially ended, Russian radar systems detected what appeared to be a ballistic missile launch. The object was actually a Norwegian scientific rocket launched to study the Northern Lights. But for a brief moment, Russian leadership, including Boris Yeltsin, activated nuclear briefcases and prepared for a potential response. Again, it came down to time, interpretation, and restraint. These incidents reveal a pattern. Nuclear war has not been avoided simply because leaders were always rational or systems were always accurate. It has been avoided in part because at critical moments, individuals questioned what they were seeing. They resisted automatic responses. They chose not to escalate. That is a fragile foundation for global survival. Technology has advanced since 1983. Detection systems are more sophisticated. Data processing is faster. Artificial intelligence is increasingly integrated into military decision-making. But the fundamental problem remains the same. Systems can fail, data can be misinterpreted, and decisions may still need to be made in minutes. In some ways, the speed of modern systems makes the problem even more dangerous. Faster detection means less time to question. More automation can reduce human hesitation, the very hesitation that prevented disaster in cases like Petrov's. If future systems are designed to minimize human doubt, they may also remove the last barrier against catastrophic error. Petrov himself later reflected on that night with a kind of quiet understatement. He didn't describe himself as a hero. He described it as a combination of training, intuition, and circumstance. But that combination is not something you can easily design into a system. It depends on a person. And on September 26, 1983, the survival of millions depended on one person choosing to doubt a machine. If you step back from the story, the most unsettling part is not how close the world came to nuclear war. It's how normal the situation actually was. Nothing about that night was supposed to be extraordinary. The system was working exactly as designed. Detect a launch, alert operators, escalate the warning. The pressure, the speed, the lack of complete information, all of it was built into the architecture of nuclear deterrence. The danger wasn't a breakdown. The danger was the system itself. Because nuclear strategy during the Cold War relied on a simple, brutal assumption. You don't wait to be hit. You respond before the enemy's missiles land. That logic forces decisions into impossibly short time frames, often less than 10 to 15 minutes. In that window, leaders must answer a question with no margin for error. Is this real? And the truth is, sometimes there is no clear answer. The Petrov incident exposes what analysts call the false positive problem. Early warning systems are designed to detect threats, but they operate in environments full of noise, atmospheric interference, sensor limitations, unexpected reflections, software errors. Even a tiny probability of error becomes dangerous when the consequence of a mistake is global destruction. Now consider the scale. At the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union together possessed over 60,000 nuclear warheads. Today, the number is lower, but still in the thousands. Enough to trigger what scientists call a nuclear winter, a collapse of global temperatures caused by smoke and debris blocking sunlight. Nuclear winter is not a theoretical footnote. Studies suggest it could destroy agriculture worldwide, leading to famine on a scale far beyond the immediate blast zones. So when Petrov chose to wait, he wasn't just preventing explosions. He may have been preventing a chain reaction that would affect every ecosystem on Earth. And yet, the systems that create this risk have not disappeared. Modern nuclear doctrines still rely on rapid detection and response. Some countries maintain launch-on-warning capabilities, meaning they can fire nuclear weapons based on early warning data before confirming an actual detonation. The logic is the same as in 1983. Act fast or lose the ability to act at all. But that logic leaves almost no room for doubt. And doubt, ironically, is what saved the world. There is another uncomfortable truth in this story. We often imagine history as something shaped by leaders, treaties, and major events. But sometimes it turns on moments that never become headlines. Decisions made in isolated rooms, by people whose names most of the world never hears. Petrov went home after that night. No global announcement, no breaking news, no recognition. The world continued exactly as before, unaware that it had just avoided one of the most catastrophic scenarios in human history. Years later, when journalists and historians began uncovering these near-miss events, the narrative of the Cold War started to shift. It was no longer just a story of balance and deterrence. It became a story of risk management under uncertainty. and how often that system came dangerously close to failure. Petrov's story stands out not because it was unique, but because we know about it. How many other false alarms were dismissed quietly? How many decisions came just as close, but remained classified, forgotten, or never fully understood? We don't have complete answers, and that uncertainty is part of the problem. Because it means the line between peace and catastrophe may be thinner than we think. The Cold War ended. The systems evolved. The weapons never disappeared. Today, nuclear arsenals still exist. Detection systems are faster. Decisions can be made even more quickly than in 1983. In some cases, automation has reduced the role of human judgment, the very thing that prevented disaster that night. We like to believe the world is safer now, more stable, more controlled, but the truth is harder to accept. The world didn't survive because everything worked perfectly. It survived because, at a critical moment, something didn't. A man hesitated. A system was questioned. A decision was delayed. And that was enough. Because sometimes the difference between survival and catastrophe is not power or technology or strategy. It's the willingness to say, this might be wrong,